We think we know them, we watch them command the screen, project absolute strength, and deliver the perfect punchline. But Hollywood is a machine built on illusions. For some of the biggest stars in television and film, the toughest role they ever played wasn't in front of the camera. It was hiding a terminal diagnosis from the world. Today we are looking at 15 legends who secretly battled for their lives, leaving us with hidden farewells just before they faded to black. Number 1. Gary Cooper. When you watch Gary Cooper in High Noon, you are looking at the definition of American stoicism. He built an entire career playing men who handled impossible situations without saying a word. It turns out, that wasn't entirely a performance. In April 1961, the Academy awarded Cooper an honorary Oscar. He didn't show up to accept it. Instead, his close friend James Stewart walked onto the stage. If you look at the broadcast footage from that night, Stewart can barely hold it together. His voice cracks, tears well up, and he tells the camera, "We're very, very proud of you, Coop." Most of the millions watching at home had no idea what was actually happening. They just saw a strangely emotional speech. But Stewart knew the truth. Cooper was in the final stages of prostate cancer, and he had only weeks left. Cooper kept his diagnosis strictly within his inner circle. In the Hollywood of that era, your persona was your currency. The studios sold the illusion of invincibility. If you were the strong, silent cowboy, you were expected to be that man permanently. Admitting to physical vulnerability felt like breaking an unspoken contract with the audience. So, Cooper just went about his life, handling the decline entirely in private. He didn't want the public's pity, and he refused to let his final image be one of physical frailty. He let Jimmy Stewart say the goodbye he wouldn't deliver himself. Watching that Oscar broadcast today, knowing the context, it completely changes the tone of the room. It wasn't a friend accepting a trophy, it was a man delivering a eulogy on live television, while the subject of that eulogy sat at home, watching quietly from his living room. Number 2. Rock Hudson. If you look up the press photos from July 1985, when Rock Hudson appeared on Doris Day's cable show, the visual contrast is jarring. Day looks practically the same as she did in their classic romantic comedies. Beside her stands a man who looks entirely unfamiliar. For 3 decades, Rock Hudson wasn't just an actor, he was an industry standard. Universal Pictures built him into the very definition of mid-century American masculinity. He was the broad-shouldered, impossibly handsome leading man that millions of women bought tickets to see. When he was diagnosed with AIDS in 1984, keeping it quiet wasn't simply a matter of privacy. In the mid-1980s, the diagnosis carried intense social stigma. Beyond that, Hudson was carrying the weight of a meticulously crafted studio persona. Acknowledging the illness meant dismantling the romantic illusion that he and the Hollywood machine had spent a lifetime protecting. So, he kept working. He took a recurring role on the soap opera Dynasty. He secretly flew to Paris for medical treatments, using aliases and slipping through the back doors of clinics. He tried to outrun a physical decline that simply could not be hidden forever. That reunion with Doris Day was meant to be a simple promotional favor for an old friend. Instead, it became an unintended turning point in American culture. Hudson didn't make a grand announcement that day. He just stood there, smiling, while his appearance communicated what his publicists had been denying for months. Looking at that footage now, you don't just see a man fading. You see a manufactured Hollywood idol colliding with a harsh, unscripted reality. He spent his entire career giving the public exactly what they wanted to see, and in his final appearance, he forced them to look at a reality they desperately wanted to ignore. Number 3. Elizabeth Montgomery. If you grew up watching Bewitched, you remember Elizabeth Montgomery as someone who could solve any problem with a simple twitch of her nose. The magic on screen was effortless and instant. But in the spring of 1995, the reality on the set of her final television movie was anything but. Montgomery was shooting Deadline for Murder, playing a relentless, hard-hitting crime reporter. During production, she began feeling incredibly drained. She assumed it was just the exhaustion of a grueling shooting schedule, 14-hour days, endless camera setups, and the baseline fatigue of being a lead actor carrying a film in her early 60s. The industry standard is to keep the cameras rolling, so she simply pushed through, refusing to delay the production or complain about her discomfort. It wasn't just fatigue. By the time the film wrapped and she finally saw a doctor, she was diagnosed with colon cancer. It was already in an advanced stage. What stands out is how she handled the 8 weeks between that diagnosis and her passing. She didn't issue a press release. She didn't sit down for a highly publicized magazine interview. Having spent her entire adult life in the center of the American living room, she made a deliberate, ironclad choice to close the door. Montgomery understood exactly how the media operated, how cameras would camp outside her home, scrutinizing every physical change, turning a deeply personal decline into public consumption. She entirely denied them that spectacle. Looking back at her performance in that final project, you can occasionally see the physical toll just beneath the surface of her character. She was fulfilling a professional commitment, unaware that she was already out of time. When the news of her passing broke, it felt completely abrupt to the public, but that suddenness was exactly what she wanted. She maintained absolute control over her own exit, leaving us with the image of a dedicated professional who finished the job and then quietly stepped away. Number 4, Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen built a legacy on being the guy who could outrun anything. Whether he was jumping a motorcycle over a barbed wire fence in The Great Escape or tearing through the streets of San Francisco in Bullitt, his entire screen presence relied on defiance, speed, and absolute control. So, when he encountered something he couldn't outdrive, the instinct to hide it was almost inevitable. In late 1979, McQueen was diagnosed with pleural mesothelioma, a severe cancer linked to asbestos exposure. For a man internationally recognized as the king of cool, physical vulnerability was completely incompatible with his brand. The studios had marketed him as the ultimate untamed American male. Allowing the public to watch his health fail meant surrendering the very image he had spent 2 decades carefully constructing. Instead of issuing statements to the press, McQueen handled the situation exactly like one of his anti-hero characters. He went off the grid and tried to beat the system. He traveled to a clinic in Mexico under a fake name, seeking out controversial and unproven alternative treatments. He wasn't merely hiding from the tabloids. He was actively trying to outmaneuver an unwinnable situation on his own terms, far away from the studio executives and the camera lenses. He managed to keep his condition largely secret until the very end. When the news of his death at age 50 broke in the fall of 1980, it completely blindsided the public. People were still expecting him to show up in another action thriller. Looking at those final months, his secrecy wasn't just about privacy. It was an act of fierce self-preservation. McQueen refused to let the world see him weak or confined to a hospital bed. He chose to vanish while the illusion was still intact, ensuring that in the memory of his audience, he remained entirely undefeated. Number 5, Gene Wilder. If you saw Gene Wilder on screen, you saw a man whose mind moved at 100 miles an hour. Whether he was having a manic breakdown in The Producers or leading children through a surreal chocolate factory, his comedic genius relied on sharp, rapid-fire intellect and an unpredictable energy. That is exactly what makes his off-screen reality so striking. Wilder lived with Alzheimer's disease for 3 years before his passing in 2016, but he chose to keep the diagnosis entirely hidden from the public. In the entertainment industry, actors often hide illnesses to protect their bankability or to maintain a carefully managed vanity. Wilder hid his condition for a completely different reason. According to his family, Wilder simply couldn't bear the thought of a child recognizing him on the street as Willy Wonka, only to see an adult struggling with confusion or decline. He knew exactly what his face meant to multiple generations. He understood that his image was tied to pure imagination and childhood joy. Allowing his cognitive decline to become public knowledge would have forced his audience to watch that magic deteriorate. So, he accepted the heavy isolation that comes with keeping a major medical secret. He withdrew from the spotlight, spending his final years quietly at home with his family. He bore the weight of a severe neurological condition in private, specifically to ensure that his public persona remained untouched by tragedy. When we look back at his legendary performances now, there is a distinct layer of grace to his exit. Gene Wilder didn't just create joy on screen, he actively sacrificed his own public support system at the very end to make sure that joy was never compromised for the people who loved him. Number 6, Paul Newman. Paul Newman spent over 50 years as one of the most famous men in the world, yet he always maintained a deliberate distance from the Hollywood machinery. He was an actor who famously preferred racing cars and running a charity food company over walking red carpets. So, when he was diagnosed with lung cancer in his early 80s, his response was entirely consistent with how he had navigated his entire life. He refused to give the public access. In the spring of 2008, paparazzi photos began surfacing of Newman looking uncharacteristically frail. The tabloids immediately started circling, and the media pressure mounted for a formal explanation. In the modern celebrity era, the standard protocol is to issue a carefully worded press release, allowing the public to track the decline. Newman's reaction was a flat refusal to play along. He instructed his representatives to aggressively deny the rumors. Even as his condition visibly worsened, his team issued statements brushing off the inquiries, sometimes using sarcasm to deflect the press. This wasn't a man in denial about his health, nor was he trying to protect a fragile studio contract. He had already stepped away from acting. It was an act of profound defiance. Newman understood that the tabloid media felt entitled to his final days, ready to turn a deeply private physical decline into a public death watch. By categorically denying the illness, he actively stripped the press of their power to narrate his exit. Looking back, his silence wasn't about hiding. It was about absolute ownership. He had given the public his iconic performances, his charisma, and hundreds of millions to charity. But he drew a hard, uncompromising line at his mortality. He forced the world to respect his boundaries one last time, ensuring his final days belonged solely to him and his family. Number 7. Raymond Burr. For decades, Raymond Burr was television's immovable object. Whether he was dominating a courtroom as Perry Mason or solving crimes from a wheelchair as Ironside, his screen presence was built on absolute, unshakable authority. He simply was not a man who looked vulnerable. When renal cancer began to overtake his body in the early 1990s, he applied that same ironclad control to his own exit. Burr didn't just hide his declining health from the press or the studios, he hid it from his own dinner guests. In the final months of his life, knowing the cancer had metastasized and his time was up, he hosted a series of lavish parties at his California ranch. He invited his closest friends and colleagues. They ate, drank, and celebrated, completely unaware that their host was secretly orchestrating his own living wake. Why put himself through that immense psychological strain? For Burr, acknowledging the illness would have instantly changed the dynamic of the room. He didn't want his final interactions defined by the heavy, awkward grief that terminal diagnoses usually bring. He wanted to see his friends happy one last time, and he was willing to carry the entire emotional weight of the farewell himself just to protect the atmosphere. Even as he was fading, he dragged himself to the set to film one last Perry Mason television movie, relying on a wheelchair off camera just to conserve enough energy to deliver his lines. Watching that final broadcast, you were seeing a man running on nothing but pure willpower and professional pride. He dictated exactly how he would be remembered, not as a patient in a hospital bed, but as the steadfast figure at the head of the table, entirely in command until the director called cut. Number 8. Jerry Orbach. If you watched television anytime in the late 90s or early 2000s, Jerry Orbach felt like a permanent fixture of New York City. As Detective Lenny Briscoe on Law & Order, he was defined by his world-weary posture, the iconic trench coat, and an endless supply of deadpan one-liners. On screen, he gave off the distinct impression of a man who could stand out in the freezing rain at a crime scene all night and barely register the cold. But the physical stamina you saw on television was masking a completely different reality. In 1994, early into his legendary run on the series, Orbach was diagnosed with prostate cancer. A network television schedule is notoriously brutal. It demands 14-hour workdays, relentless pacing, and constant physical presence. For an actor in his 60s facing a severe diagnosis, the logical step would be to quietly bow out. Instead, Orbach made a staggering decision. He simply stayed at work, and he kept the illness largely out of the press for an entire decade. He didn't hide his condition out of vanity or a need to preserve a Hollywood illusion. Orbach was an old-school Broadway veteran. To him, the ultimate professional sin was missing a curtain call or holding up production. He managed his treatments during his off hours and then walked right back onto the soundstage to hit his marks. He likely knew that revealing the true extent of his illness would force the network to write him off, stripping away the daily grind that anchored his life. When you revisit his final seasons now, you can occasionally catch him leaning a bit heavier against a precinct desk or moving slightly slower, At the time, audiences just saw a veteran detective carrying the weight of the job. In reality, we were watching a masterclass in sheer endurance from an actor who refused to let his body dictate his retirement. Number 9. Telly Savalas. Telly Savalas didn't just play a tough guy, he engineered a completely unique kind of American cool. With the shaved head, the tailored suits, and the trademark lollipop, his portrayal of Detective Kojak projected absolute unbothered authority. He was the guy who always had the upper hand, and he never let anyone see him sweat. In 1989, Savalas was diagnosed with prostate cancer. For the next 5 years, he made a calculated decision to keep that reality entirely to himself. In the entertainment business, admitting to a severe physical decline doesn't just invite aggressive tabloid attention. It fundamentally changes the way people look at you. Pity is the exact opposite of the commanding presence Savalas had spent decades building. If the public knew he was ill, every television appearance and every interview would be viewed through a lens of sympathy. Savalas came from a generation of performers who viewed that kind of sympathy as a downgrade. He simply refused to be a patient in the eyes of his audience. So, he maintained the facade. He continued acting, taking on television roles, and making public appearances with the exact same larger-than-life energy he had always delivered. He carried the immense psychological weight of a terminal diagnosis while projecting the relaxed confidence of a man with all the time in the world. Unlike actors who retreat into isolation when their health fades, Savalas hid in plain sight. He actively chose to spend his final years working in an industry that scrutinizes every physical flaw, proving that his endurance was just as formidable off-camera as it was on. When his passing was announced in 1994, the abruptness of the news confirmed that his strategy had worked perfectly. He controlled the narrative until the very end, ensuring the mask never slipped. Number 10. Audrey Hepburn. In the fall of 1992, Audrey Hepburn traveled to Somalia for UNICEF. Photographs from that trip show her surrounded by devastating famine, looking incredibly fragile but relentlessly focused on the work. What the cameras couldn't capture was that she was already experiencing intense abdominal pain, discomfort she actively pushed aside so she could finish her mission. When she finally returned to the United States and doctors discovered a rare, inoperable cancer of the appendix, Hepburn made a remarkably swift decision to shut the world out. For a woman whose face had defined cinematic elegance since Roman holiday, the media would have eagerly turned her medical decline into a highly publicized spectacle. The press would have camped outside her hospital, tracking every physical change, reducing a global icon to a clinical subject. Hepburn simply refused to allow it. She didn't want to spend her remaining time in a sterile medical facility under the glare of the American media. She wanted the quiet of her home in Switzerland. Because she was too weak for a commercial flight, her lifelong friend, designer Hubert de Givenchy, arranged a private jet filled with flowers to take her back. This wasn't merely a logistical arrangement, it was a profound reclamation of her privacy. She took total control over her final environment, far away from the industry that had watched her every move for decades. Looking back at those last photographs from Somalia, the context shifts completely. You aren't just looking at a retired movie star doing charity work. You are watching a woman unknowingly spending her absolute last reserves of energy on the world's most vulnerable children, before quietly pulling the curtain on her own life to ensure her final days belonged entirely to her. Number 11. Andy Kaufman. If you spent the late 70s watching Andy Kaufman on Saturday Night Live or Taxi, you knew there was only one rule: never believe what you were seeing. He didn't just tell jokes, he engineered elaborate, uncomfortable deceptions. When he was diagnosed with a rare lung cancer in late 1983, the reality of his illness directly collided with the persona he had spent years constructing. Kaufman had cried wolf so many times, faking onstage brawls, creating hostile alter egos, and famously joking about staging his own disappearance. That truth itself had become just another setup. He kept the diagnosis limited to an incredibly tight inner circle. For a performer who communicated almost entirely through layers of irony, stepping completely out of character to announce a terminal medical condition simply wasn't something he knew how to do. As the disease progressed, he quietly traveled to the Philippines to undergo unproven alternative therapies, far removed from the American press, attempting to outmaneuver the one situation he couldn't script. When his physical decline became undeniable, it barely registered as a medical emergency to the public. Fans, and even seasoned industry colleagues, assumed his gaunt appearance was just extreme physical dedication to an upcoming, bizarre character. When the news of his passing broke in the spring of 1984, the immediate national reaction wasn't grief. It was deep skepticism. A massive portion of the public flatly refused to believe it, assuming it was his ultimate television stunt. His secrecy during those final months created a completely unique paradox. He had trained his audience so effectively to doubt reality that when he actually faced a genuine physical decline, he had to endure it, while the rest of the world patiently waited for a punchline. Number 12, Chuck Connors. At 6'6", Chuck Connors didn't just walk onto a television set, he completely dominated it. Before he picked up his iconic Winchester rifle to play Lucas McQueen on The Rifleman, he had been a professional athlete in both the NBA and Major League Baseball. He was the literal embodiment of rugged, mid-century American resilience. His entire screen presence was built on the premise that he was an unbreakable protector. When he developed lung cancer in his early 70s, that physical foundation began to give way. But for a man whose brand was synonymous with absolute strength, publicly conceding to a severe illness was entirely out of the question. In the television landscape of his era, actors like Connors weren't just playing heroes. They were expected to maintain that posture off camera. The public viewed him as an impenetrable force. If word got out that his health was failing, the press wouldn't just report on a sick actor. They would actively document the physical collapse of a television giant. Every camera lens would focus on his frailty, steadily replacing the towering figure in the public consciousness with the image of a vulnerable patient. Connors firmly refused to authorize that narrative. He chose to manage his physical decline strictly behind closed doors, leaning only on his closest family. He completely withdrew from the public gaze before the disease could visibly strip away his imposing stature. Looking at his legacy now, his silence was a final, fiercely protective measure. He endured the heavy psychological weight of a terminal diagnosis in isolation so that his audience would never have to see their hero lose a fight. When he passed in the fall of 1992, the public was left genuinely stunned, simply because they had spent decades conditioned to believe that Chuck Connors was a man nothing could bring down. Number 13, Raul Julia. When Raul Julia appeared in the 1994 video game adaptation Street Fighter, critics and audiences were genuinely baffled. Why would a distinguished Shakespearean-trained actor, the man who had just breathed such magnetic charm into Gomez Addams, sign on to play a cartoonish villain in a chaotic martial arts movie? The reality was that Julia was dealing with advanced stomach cancer. He kept the diagnosis tightly guarded within his immediate circle. Unlike actors who hide their declining health to protect their vanity or secure future contracts, Julia's secrecy served a completely different purpose. He didn't hide his condition to save his career. He hid it because he had a very specific final objective to complete. He took the role of M. Bison for one reason. His young children were massive fans of the video game franchise. If you watch his performance closely, the physical toll of the disease is undeniable. His face is gaunt, and his frame is drastically diminished beneath the heavy, exaggerated military costume. The production itself was grueling, shot in the intense heat of Thailand. People on set noted that Julia was often in immense discomfort, sometimes requiring assistance just to stand between setups. Yet, the moment the director called action, he summoned a massive theatrical energy. He delivered his lines with a manic, commanding intensity that essentially anchored the entire production. He refused to let the set become a medical vigil, and he certainly didn't want his kids associating his final project with weakness or pity. Watching the film today completely shifts its meaning. You aren't watching a prestige actor slumming it in a B-movie for a paycheck. You are watching a father quietly enduring unimaginable physical exhaustion, using his absolute last reserves of strength to leave his children one final spectacular gift. Number 14, Alan Rickman. Alan Rickman possessed a voice that could instantly quiet a room. Whether he was meticulously taking over Nakatomi Plaza in Die Hard or projecting a cold, impenetrable authority as Severus Snape, his screen presence relied on absolute precision and control. He never appeared rushed, and he never let an audience see him out of his depth. When he was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer in 2015, he applied that exact same formidable control to his own private reality. Rickman was a towering figure in British theatre and cinema, yet he viewed the modern celebrity machine with a healthy amount of disdain. If he had announced his illness, the global media response would have been deafening. Every subsequent public appearance, every voiceover session, and every casual photograph would have been aggressively analyzed for signs of weakness. He refused to let his final months be defined by public mourning or industry pity. Instead, he strictly limited the information to his closest confidants and simply kept working. He recorded his final voice roles and calmly organized his affairs, entirely out of the tabloid spotlight. He didn't want his audience watching his final performances with a heavy, sympathetic gaze. He wanted them focusing entirely on the work itself. When the news of his death broke in early 2016, the abruptness of it left the public genuinely stunned. There had been no slow, highly publicized decline. For a British legend who had spent his career commanding the screen, his exit was remarkably deliberate. He delivered his final lines, quietly stepped away from the microphone, and simply allowed the stage to fade to black. It was a masterclass in maintaining personal boundaries, proving that even in an industry built on extreme visibility, a performer can still claim the absolute right to a sudden, private departure. Number 15. Norm Macdonald. Norm Macdonald built his entire career on a very specific kind of tension. He would sit behind the Saturday Night Live weekend update desk, look directly into the camera, and deliver the most uncomfortable truth in the room, completely indifferent to whether the audience groaned or laughed. He was a comedian who categorically refused to ask the public for validation or sympathy. For 9 years, while he was doing talk shows, touring the country, and recording podcasts, Macdonald was dealing with multiple myeloma. He didn't just hide it from the tabloid press. He hid it from his closest friends and longtime writing partners. In modern entertainment, vulnerability is often used as a currency. Performers frequently turn their personal physical struggles into public narratives. Macdonald fundamentally rejected that concept. He understood the mechanics of a joke better than anyone, and he knew exactly what pity does to a room. Pity is the absolute death of comedy. If the audience knew he was unwell, the context of every punchline would instantly change. People wouldn't just be laughing at his brilliance. They would be clapping out of sympathy for a man with a severe diagnosis. He simply refused to let his health condition redefine how people consumed his work. In the summer of 2020, knowing his physical stamina was severely declining, he sat alone in his living room and recorded one final stand-up hour directly into a camera, completely uninterrupted. He kept it hidden away, just in case he couldn't return to the stage. When you watch that footage now, it entirely shifts your perspective. You aren't just watching a comedian practice material in his house. You are watching a master of his craft, working entirely in secret, making absolutely sure he got his final thoughts on the record without a single drop of sentimentality getting in the way.